This week's Parashas Naso. Shavuos Yisrael Hashem is this week. Usually the Bidbar or Parashas Naso comes in advance of Shavuos. And Naso is the longest parshah, the longest single parshah that we read on Shabbos. And it's a fantastic example of how something can seem to be so mundane on the surface, but al pi sod is really quite deep and profound, and has a tremendous amount to say about life of this world and history, Jewish history for that matter. And it comes towards the end of the parsha. At the end of the parsha, after we speak about different inyanim, we're talking about the Chanukah Mishkan. The tabernacle has been completed, and the Nesiim, the princes, are going to bring gifts as part of the dedication offering. And it's a very interesting section because it seems to repeat itself over and over again. They all seem to bring the same thing. There's different Meforshim, different commentaries written as to the nuances of difference in terms of intention. There's a lot to be learned in terms of, on a pshat level, also in terms of the end of the parsha. All these different psukim seemingly repeating themselves over and over again. It starts off, right, the beginning. The first Naso Hamakri b'yam harishon es karbono Nachshem ben Aminadav Mat Yehuda. The first one to offer a gift for the dedication of the Mishkan was Nadav ben Avihu, who was Nachshem ben Aminadav, who was the one who was the prince of the tribe of Yehuda, the king, the Melech, right? And he was the first to bring it, so he seems original, right? The karbono karas kesef. Right, and his korban was a silver plate, achash shloshim hameya, right? It was 130, the weight, mishkala. What it means? It's weight, right? Mizrach echad kesef shivim shekel b'shekel kodesh shnei malayim solas belula b'shemen limincha. Right, he brought a special a kaf, a certain amount of silver spoon, and they are filled with oil for the mincha offering, and it goes on to repeat itself for each of the shvatim. And at first, it doesn't really seem so significant, except for the fact that bringing this special offering as part of the Chanukah Mishkan. But the Arizal explains something very profound, very deep over here, that really is tied to one of the most important matters of all of Jewish history, and that specifically is the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, which was the source of causing the Jewish people to get involved in the golden calf, and really the proverbial thorn in the side of the Jewish people until history, until the end of history. Perhaps even worse, at the end of history, they can be leaders, those who turn against the Jewish people. Their principles are ways to identify to some degree. The Zohar brings down in Parashas Breshis about the different types of Erev Rav. And you read the listing over there, it's not so clear who's not involved as part of the Erev Rav. But anyhow, he brings down over here that this is an allusion to the Erev Rav, what's going on right here. It was Moshe Rabbeinu who suggested, against the advice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to bring the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, along to try to rectify what was driving him. What was so important to take such a phenomenal risk that we're paying for thousands of years later? So it turns out that the Erev Rav does not just begin in Egypt. The story of the Erev Rav goes back to Adam HaRishon. The Gemara in Eruvin says that after Adam HaRishon was kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and he began the process of rectification, for 130 years, he separated from his wife. And during the 130 years, both of them, Adam and Chava, worked on getting the Zuhama out of them. Gemara discusses in Eruvin, it's a little bit Kabbalistic, one of the few places. And as they were doing this, as they were rejecting the Zuhama, the spiritual impurity that became a part of them because of the interaction with the snake, there was a negative byproduct. They were becoming purified, but that which they were releasing to the world became what is called by the Gemara itself as Shidim Richim Belil. 3 different types of negative souls, 3 different types of spirits, so to speak, not human beings, but a spiritual reality that's tantamount to a damaged soul. And the Gemara leaves it. Doesn't explain what happens to them, or what happens to Adam HaRishon and Chava. But after 130 years, we see that Shais is born, and he's a tzaddik. And as everyone points out, that this was the result of having released the Suhamos. He was not born like Cain and Hevel, with an intermixture of impurity within him. And that was a result of the tshuva they were doing by releasing these Shidim Richim V'Lilim into the world. At the end of 130 years, Shais is born. And that's the end of the story as far as we know. But the Arizal explains that's just the beginning of the story. These souls actually came back as people in the Dor Mabul. These souls came back, the generation of flood, and they were the ones who were so destructive. They're the ones who they were so damaged. They were the souls that caused mankind to go astray. So they were wiped away in the Mabul. But they're not finished yet, because history is about Tikkun, and specifically about these souls being rectified. So therefore they came back. The next time was Dor HaFlaga, which was not destroyed. The generation of the dispersion of Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel, was not destroyed. They were scattered throughout the world, given different languages. So it seems to be somewhat of a tikkun. And those were the souls again. They came back in the generation, and they again rebelled against the Kodesh Baruch Hu, but somewhat on a lesser degree, and they were destroyed as well, eventually, or they died off, right? The next time they came back as Dor Stom, the generation of Stom, many years later, the time of Avram Avinu, and we all know what happened to Stom. They were destroyed, and again, even though they were evil, the people of Stom were evil, they were not evil like the generation going back to the time of the Mabul, of the flood. So this tikkun taking place. Then the Arizal explains, they came back a fourth time, and the next time they came back, the ones that rectified, because there's different levels of these souls, and some were less damaged than others, and the ones that came back that were rectified more or less, came back as Bnei Yaakov. They came back as the sons of Yaakov, amazingly, right? So they had gone through the rectification. But the ones that were not rectified completely came back as Egyptians in the time of Yosef and Yaakov Avinu. They came back as Egyptians. And he explains, this is why it says in the beginning of Parashas Shmos that Paro says to his people, we have to deal wisely with Ha'am, with the people, which we assume refers to the Jewish people. And then it says we have to set taskmasters over Bnei Israel, the Jewish people, seemingly just repeating itself, a different name for the same people. But the Arizal says no. He says no, because what happened was these people, these damaged souls that came back had enough of a rectification, enough of a tikkun, to have a sense that they were not like the rest of the Egyptians. They began to separate themselves from the Egyptian society and actually move towards Yaakov and his family, move towards the Jewish people in Yosef's time. And Yosef and Yaakov knew that this was part of world rectification. So if you look in the Chumash, when Yosef becomes viceroy of Egypt, which seemingly is all part of the picture over here, one of the reasons why it has to happen in history, is more dominant than people know. He becomes viceroy of Egypt, and what happens is there's a famine, like he predicted. So they come to Paro and they say, give us food. He says, go to Yosef. And Yosef says, they say to Paro, no, we can't go to him because, he's asking unreasonable things of us. To get the food? What does he want? He wants us to do bris milah. Why? Where in the world does Yosef get this idea to do bris milah on the Egyptians to give them food? Where is it such a chiyuv, such an obligation? What is it going to bring to the world to have all these Gentile Egyptians to do bris milah? So the answer is because he knew amongst his Egyptians were these souls that had to be released, but they're being held back by the klippas, by the reality of spiritual tumah, of impurity. So therefore, Yosef figured out that he could use his position of power given to him by Hashgacha Pratis in order to have bris milah on all the Egyptians, and those souls that were relevant to Tikkun would emerge as a different type of Egyptian as a result of bris milah. So that's what he hasn't done. They're all asking the question, what was Yosef thinking? Why would he do a thing like this? Because he understood. And as a result of that, they emerged as a unique community that eventually became the Erev Rav. And that's what Paro says. Let's deal wisely with Ha'am, as the Medrash points out. Anytime it says Ha'am, it's always a reference to the Erev Rav, because Paro is not interested in destroying them. He's not interested in killing them and manipulating. He's only interested in bringing them back to become Egyptians once again.